Ah, Sherlock. Let me guess. The AI isn't doing exactly what you want, so naturally it's everyone else's fault.
Consistency, John. It's the Achilles heel of AI-generated content. Each output is a new roll of the dice. Chaos, masquerading as creativity.
Right. Because the AI getting the color of your shirt wrong is such a pressing case.
Not just shirts, faces, styles, entire scenes, everything. Without consistency, the creative vision collapses. Imagine if one of your blog posts suddenly switched fonts mid-sentence.
I'd call it modern art.
I believe I've found a solution, however. What if we could train the AI? Teach it exactly what you mean. A face, a style, a specific color palette. Anything less is just amateur hour.
Right. Because everyone has hours to spend training a model. Very practical.
Then use reference images, ControlNet. Whatever it takes to impose some discipline. AI isn't magic, John. It's a tool. It needs guidance, not vague requests for some unknown subject.
Funny, I've been saying the same thing about you for years.
There, consistency. Achievable. The case is solved. Now go write about it in your little diary.
Brilliant. I'll title it Why I Tolerate Sherlock Holmes.
Yes, do that. And hurry up, John. We've got a new case, solving how to get AI to generate my afternoon tea.
Welcome to Fuse, the AI Creative Podcast, where we explore the intersection of AI and creativity with your hosts, Rob and Jason.
All right, welcome to episode 7 of Fuse, the AI Creative Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Rob. I'm here with Jason and producer Liz, and we've got an action-packed show for you today. Jason, how you doing, man?
I am doing good. A little worn out. I had a major AI project that I had to sign an NDA for, so I can't even really share anything about it. I had to think a lot about consistency, which is the topic of our episode today. There was a retreat for a law firm in Los Angeles, and they wanted to do a little video that shared the very first retreat that ever happened. So I had to make some photos, talk, and tell a little bit of their story. They imagined what life might be like in 2025. And I used a whole lot of Act 1 where I had to act out every part and voice every line and use 11 Labs to turn that into different voices. It was an extravaganza of AI, and that's all I can say about that. How about you? What have you been up to?
That is all you're legally allowed to say about that.
Yes.
Yeah, I've been out making some human art lately. As you know, I'm a photographer outside of the AI world of making pretty images with computers. So I've been doing some photo gigs, had a few concerts this week. I've been keeping an eye on the news, and it seems like rumors are starting to swirl about a new OpenAI image model that could possibly be coming out. Sam Altman had some cryptic tweets, as he often does. I'm keeping an eye on that because DALL-E is far overdue for an upgrade.
I love the thought that a new model could be coming. My only fear with OpenAI is that their models are often so locked down that you can't do what you want to do with it, even if it's a great model. So we'll have to see what happens there.
Indeed.
All right. Well, today we have a pretty exciting episode. We're going to talk about consistency, and you can create some really cool stuff with AI. But one of the biggest challenges from the beginning was if I create a character that I like, if I get an image that looks sort of the style or an object that I would like to recreate over and over again, how do I do that? And so it was almost impossible in the beginning, and now it's getting better all the time. So I look forward to tackling.
No joke. It's still not a cup of tea either, but we've got some tools that we will dive into. My very first encounter with this problem as a whole was in one of my very first experiments with AI. We've talked about it in the past. I've tried to do a children's book with ChatGPT and Midjourney, and I'm like, why can't I just get the kid to look the same in every image? They'd maybe look similar or sometimes totally different, but even when they're similar, there'd be subtle differences across scenes, things like shirt color, hairstyle, image style, tone, and you can fix a lot of this in post-production. But just like in traditional production workflows, let's fix it in post is the bane of the producer's existence. And we don't want to put our producers through that, particularly when I'm also the producer. So yeah, I'm ready for this episode.
Yeah. So in this episode, we're going to talk about strategies for getting consistent character generations with AI tools, specifically with image and video models. It's going to be a fun conversation that I think will be really helpful for our listeners. So that's the problem we're going to tackle. How do we create consistent characters with AI? For any of our listeners that have ever tried to do this, you've probably banged your head against a wall. It can be very frustrating, especially if you're using something like ChatGPT and you say, I want to create this exact same character again. And it says, okay, I'll do it for you. And then it won't do it. And it'll tell you that it did it. I remember when I first started using generative AI, I was creating a little promo video for a series on Jesus miracles. And I remember getting an image of Jesus that I liked. And then I tried to keep reprompting that same thing. And every time Jesus looked like a different character, and it really kind of breaks the continuity. Things fall apart pretty quickly. But Rob, what can we do about that consistency problem now?
I remember a time when you and I both decided to enter the Runway AI generated film contest, and we had a concept, obviously, like I think we were both busy for 2 of the 3 days. So we tried to cram everything into one day, which is where we went wrong to begin with. We had a concept, we start running with it. And then it's like, hey, this character doesn't look the same between these things. I think it was like 3 a.m. I'm about to pass out. I'm like, dude, we just need to put this thing on hold because this consistency thing is going to be the end of me. And so we put that on hold until technology is there to help us catch up and achieve that vision.
Yes, we're just like George Lucas, except without the billions of dollars and all of that. Now, just wait until the technology catches up. We can go back and do a special edition of that thing someday.
Indeed. Hopefully we won't have to wait like 40 years for it, though. But then also, to be like totally transparent, to prep for this episode, I tried to illustrate the next book in the Max and Teddy series with all of the techniques that we're about to learn here. And I'm still having a hard time, even 2 years later, with all these new tools. So this will be more of an art than a science, but hopefully these will be some tools in your toolbox to get you a little closer to consistency.
All right. So I think the big question, Rob, being that you really understand the stuff under the hood, why is it so hard to get consistent characters? Can't the AI just know what I want? I can put an image in and it can describe it. Why can't it look at that image and reproduce the character within it? Especially when like DALL-E or Gemini can tell me, yeah, I'll make that character for you again. And then it looks nothing like the original. What's happening there? Why is that?
Yeah, well, step one there is that ChatGPT and DALL-E are 2 different models, and they don't really talk to each other that well. So they need to have some communication counseling before they can get on the same page. And hopefully if we get a new image model out of OpenAI, that'll solve some of those problems. But really the core underlying problem here is that AI is built on randomness, right? Just imagine if everything you generated looked exactly the same. You don't want that. So every generation is going to start from a random starting point. And you can prompt for the exact same subject, exact same setting, exact same style every single time, exact same words. But there's so many ways to interpret every element of that prompt that you're pretty much guaranteed to get something different every time. If you just say, hey, give me a boy in a green shirt, that green shirt could be a graphic tee, that could be a button down, that could be a polo. What does green mean? Is green like the hex code 00FF00, which is pure green? Or is it forest green? Or is it sage green? If there's only some way that we could communicate those things to the model, get those things out of our head and into the image model or the video model, and it turns out there is. So we're going to be talking about some of those techniques as we go here.
I got to tell you, Rob, I am super impressed that you know the hex code for green. I've been a graphic designer for 30 years and I didn't know that. I'm learning new things even as we get started. So as you said, there is a way to get consistency and your workflow really matters. The first thing we're going to tackle is workflow. We're going to go beyond just talking about prompting here. If all you ever do when you're generating an image is type out a prompt, you're going to be at the mercy of the model. Most of the time, the model isn't going to do what you want it to do, even if you cross your fingers and hope for good things. So when you're working with a model, text is just one of the ways that you can tell the model what you want it to do. I think most of us got started in using ChatGPT. I know in the early days before these models had come around, I'd go into Bing image generator and try and type out what I wanted. But that's not the only way. There's a lot more that you can do to communicate with whatever model you want to create an image for you. So we're going to go over some of those things. If you're just casually creating an image, though, you can just prompt with text. But if you're trying to achieve something really specific, if you want to get what's in your head on the screen, then you're going to have to pull in some other tools. We'll get into more of those details here. Start with one tool and add additional tools as you go. One of the things that I have been saying for a long time, but I think you put a different spin on when I was writing the book, is I said that AI is a conversation, not just a command or a query. I was thinking more about creating text prompts when using a chatbot. You said something that was really helpful to me. You said, I think that's even true when you're generating images, that it is a back and forth and you are sort of having a conversation and you try something. For me, that was a really helpful aha moment.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to set the tone for everything we're about to talk about. We're going to go over a bunch of different techniques and tools, but none of them are going to be your magic bullet. If you think about engaging with a chatbot and you're having a conversation, able to iterate, make changes, and give feedback, this is the visual equivalent of that. And so if you think about how you would interact with a designer on a project, or if you're commissioning a piece of artwork to a painter, you're probably not going to explain exactly what is in your mind the very first time. And even if you do, the person who's creating that thing isn't going to understand it exactly how you intended it the very first time. So there has to be some sort of back and forth. And what we're about to cover is going to be some of the language that you can use and some of the tools that you can use to go back and forth. We'll start with the easiest. We'll build up to some more complex. And so, Jason, if you have only ever typed a prompt and nothing else into an image generator, where might you start with adding some pieces that could help with consistency and directability of these image and video models?
Well, if we think about level one of where you get started, the absolute bare minimum for what you want to offer the AI model that you're working with is a prompt and seeds. We're not growing images by watering them and putting them out in the sun, but there is a way to create consistency, in a sense, starting with prompts and seeds.
Yeah, so like prompt I get, seed might be something new. So let's start with prompts. What are some ways to ensure or help move toward consistency with a prompt?
Well, the first thing is that most of the time when AI fails, whether it's a chatbot or an image generator, you haven't really given it enough information to be successful. When you just say, I want a cute puppy dog or whatever, it doesn't know what kind of puppy, it doesn't know what the conditions are, the setting, the sun, all those kinds of things. So rather than saying something like, I want an image of a man in a pub, if you're more specific, if you say, I want a 30-year-old Irishman with ginger hair, and he's leaning on a dimly lit bar in an Irish pub with antique brown paneling, if you say something that's more specific like that, you're likely to get the image that you want the first time. But then when you're creating the next image, you have to use that exact same phrasing, and then you can add the additional information to get a new picture that hopefully shares many of those details. That consistent and detailed prompting can mitigate some of the ambiguity that is present when you are just giving the bare minimum, and it reduces some of that randomness and gives you a better shot at achieving what you're after.
Let's talk about seeds. So seeds, like you said, are not related to gardening in this situation, but because generative AI models work on randomness, they're inconsistent by design. If everything looked exactly the same every single time, that would be a bad thing. And some people, myself included, might say that a lot of AI-generated art does look the same, but at least there's some randomness built into it to give some diversity. Most models will use what's called a seed, which is just a random number that serves as a starting point for generating that image. Every single word in your prompt is going to change the overall images that the model will create. And so some of those words or phrases might have unintended consequences that you didn't think about. Things like colors really tend to bleed over in image models, or things like characters tend to blend together and have some overlap. And so even if you use the same prompt and just change a few words, even with the same seed, it could have a big impact on the final images. So that's not going to be enough. Achieving perfect consistency with prompt alone and seed alone isn't necessarily possible.
I always think of the scene in Jurassic Park where Ian Malcolm, who's explaining chaos theory, explains that if a drop of water falls on your hand, even in the same spot, the inconsistencies in your skin texture will make it run in a completely different place. To me, that's always been a helpful thing to think about when I think about why this doesn't work. One little variable can really make the image land in a completely different place.
Yep, which in some ways, that's really cool. That can help us produce some new and unexpected things. When we're trying to produce consistent images, that's not so cool. So we've got some more tools, though, that we can use to kind of go above and beyond prompting. Starting out, use the same prompt, use some of those techniques. Look at your seed. Most of them will allow you to specify a seed. Lock in your seed and use the same one every time. That'll get you 20% of the way there, maybe. But if you want to level up, level 2 is using an image as an input. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. We can influence the output of the model on the fly by what we put into it beyond just our text, and that's using reference images. Rather than trying to figure out ways to describe the image you're trying to produce in just the right way, you can just show the model what you're looking for. If you're trying to communicate with a designer and you want them to make something specific, sometimes the easiest way to get that vision out of your head is to just show them a reference rather than be like, make the logo pop. Well, what does it mean to make the logo pop? You can just show them an image and say, here's what I think of. With reference images, this could be an actual photograph, like a real world image. That could be a sample style. For example, I just did a demo earlier prepping for this episode. I wanted to make my headshot look like Van Gogh's self-portrait. I used that as a reference image to guide the style of the image that was created. That could be a generated image, anything, as long as it gets the point across.
Yeah, so using an image input is one way to prompt. And this is the simplest way of all. For me, it's the most effective and the one I use more often than not. You can do what is called image-to-image generation, where you upload an image that you like. And what's happening, from what I understand, is that the AI is adding some random noise and then uses that as a starting point to create a new image.
Yeah, technical Rob popping in here. When an image is generated, you're starting with pure random noise. The model is designed to take all that noise and starts to clean it up to make an image. When you're doing an image to image, it takes that image you use as an input, works it backwards halfway through the process, and then starts from there. But you can control in a lot of these models how much you denoise the image. That could be a little bit, and it'll change some subtle details. Or you can take it almost all the way to randomness, and it will just use kind of the overall tone. So if you try an image to image and you don't get the perfect thing, you can adjust that denoise parameter and play with that a little bit.
Thank you, Technical Rob, for explaining that. I will go back and rewind and watch that 4 times, and then maybe I'll understand what you just said. That's good stuff. So while an image to image can help guide the style of whatever you're creating, it doesn't actually have a huge impact on what you end up with. One little technique that I've used a time or two, I used this on a series of biblical selfies, is doing some photo bashing even before you generate an image. So bringing a bunch of different elements into Photoshop and creating a collage that represents the idea you're after. So when I was creating these biblical selfies, like I might take a picture of me sitting on my couch, I threw a sheet around me, took a picture up high, and then prompted for a tree below me to do Zacchaeus in the tree. There was enough information in my little photo bash that guided the model. I was using Stable Diffusion for this to give the output. That can be a very helpful way to get what you're after.
One cool tool for playing with this concept of using image inputs is the image generator Leonardo.ai. They've got a cool tool called the real-time canvas, which you can pull it up on your iPhone, your iPad, whatever, and just start doodling, give it a prompt, and it will interpret whatever you've doodled through the prompt and generate images in real time. So like every time you make a stroke, it regenerates the image. It's a really cool, fast way of prototyping. And you can start to scribble like, hey, I want a tree here and I want a person here. Even if you're drawing like my 5-year-old, it will still do the same thing. It's basically an image to image. It denoises that image, uses it as a starting point for your prompt, and can control some composition and tone that way. So that's a cool tool. What about style? How do we start to dig into style and influencing that when we generate images?
So another cool option is that you can actually provide a style reference. You can find an image that represents the look you want. Maybe you want a painting. Maybe you want something that's cinematic. Maybe you want something that's like papercraft or origami or something like that. You can give that to certain models and it can look at that style. I have found that when I am generating in something like Midjourney, if I give it multiple style references that are all the same style, it helps to generate something in that same style. You can provide a prompt and the model will apply that style as it generates. And again, it's not always going to do what you want right off the bat. I have found that sometimes you give up too early. I will regenerate variations, remixes, all of that, ask the AI to produce multiple images from those references. 1 out of 5 of them might be good, but that reference provided what you needed in order to get to the final result that you're after.
I think that's an understated technique here. Because it's built on randomness, sometimes you just got to roll the dice a lot before you get a Yahtzee, right? Midjourney has a really cool feature called mood boards that I think are crazy powerful. Midjourney has had a style reference for a while now. You can upload a single image and then use that or a couple images to get a little bit better. Mood boards are like style reference on steroids. You can get up to 100 images, all of the same style that you're after, put them into a mood board, and then use that as the style reference for your new images. And so you basically just upload that selection and it'll recreate that style without any additional prompting. So some examples, like I've built one for travel photos. I've built one for unsplash style portraiture. We did a project back in the AI collaborative where we were doing a demo video production with a 2001 Space Odyssey kind of concept. And so I threw some screen caps in there as style references. And then also like Polaroids, anything that you can imagine.
I haven't played with mood boards all that much, but I was having trouble generating images that looked good for a biblical scene I was trying to capture. And you actually created a mood board for me using some images as a reference. I also have a mood board that just has various stills of you from the show that puts me in a good mood anytime I see it.
You can just subscribe at aicreativepodcast.com.
There you go.
You don't have to go through all that, man.
Okay. Well, I will go sign up right now.
All right. Well, wait till we're done. All right. We're going to talk about character reference now. And so if you wanted to do that and produce all sorts of images of me doing crazy things like riding roller coasters, which you've done, we can use a character reference to essentially provide the model with an idea of what the character that you want to create should look like. Basically, you provide the character, the model uses it to generate the image. Easiest way to use both this and the style reference are either Midjourney or Leonardo. And it's not always perfect. It'll get an approximate likeness, but it's not going to be exactly what you are expecting. Some images and some people tend to do better than others. For me, it gets like maybe 60% of the way there. It's like, dude has glasses, dude has a goatee, but then he looks even more like computer nerd than I really am. So I'm a little offended by that, but images are great, Jason. We both do a lot of video work. How do we do this sort of thing with video?
Well, this is one really exciting development. In the early days of video, you could only text prompt. It was really hard to get anything very consistent. When I'm generating video, I'm going image to video, which basically allows you to upload an image and then the model makes it move. I say that with a huge asterisk because most of the time it takes a lot of generations to get it to move the way that you want it to. But these tools will animate what you create if you know how to describe what you're after. And then, as we've talked about many times, if the model's never seen it or doesn't really understand, it may not know how to make it move in that way. One of the things that I have really enjoyed in recent models is that they now allow you to create a first frame, last frame. So I can create what I want the first frame of the video to look like and where I want it to end up. For me, that often means that I will manipulate an image that I've generated in Photoshop to move things to a new position. And then you can give it first frame, last frame. I think Runway even now has a middle frame. So you've got 3 options. You can put something in the middle as well. And sometimes this becomes a great solution.
Yeah, if you've tried Sora as well, Sora has a cool tool called Storyboard, which lets you combine both the keyframe aspect of first and last frames with images, but then also text. So you can take a timeline up to 20 seconds if you have a pro plan, 10 seconds if you have a plus plan, and you can arrange images, text along that timeline, and kind of the model will weave between them as it generates the video. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So in addition to having your character, you can also get some consistency in the way that you move throughout your various shots, because now these models have the ability to control the camera in a sense. Minimax, Kling, Pika, all of these will allow you to dolly in, pan left, right, tilt up and down, and that helps you direct the shot. If you're trying to create a narrative sequence, having consistent camera moves also helps you tell a consistent story. They also have added the ability to have reference images, which looks at the image and allows you to incorporate those things in the scene. So this could be people, it can be objects, it could be locations. In fact, Kling now has a whole new function called elements that will let you reference a bunch of different things, and it will incorporate all of those into the scene. It's a really neat new feature that I've played with a bit. Minimax has something called subject reference, so you can kind of train a subject in. That means you can prompt that subject with text. And Pika now has something called scenes, which also gives you more control over your character development in your video.
Yeah, Pika Scenes is really cool and promising. Basically, you can give it 3 or 4 images and it intelligently remixes those things into the scene. It's like, actually, when Pika first came out, it had a lot of hype and we used it and I was like, okay, that's not that great. But I feel like, just like we talked about in our filmmaking episode, every time some new model comes out, you just want to bebop back and forth between all of them. And Pika Scenes is something that almost got me to subscribe again, but I did not. One other tool that I recently stumbled across, which I don't know if this has been there for a while or not, is in Runway. Like, we've known Runway as video to video. So basically, like, you can upload a video and say, hey, make this comic book style, and it'll change the style. You tried it, I tried it. It was kind of inconsistent between the different generations. And so it's like, just the interpretation of that style, comic style, there would be too markedly different between the different videos that you produced. But now it lets you, you upload a video, it extracts the first frame. You can download that first frame, use some of these image options to stylize the image, bring it back in as the first frame. So now you've got your original video, a stylized first frame, and it'll apply the style from that first frame to the entire video.
Man, Rob, you just blew my mind. I did not know you could do that. I think it's time for us to take a break so I can try that out. When we come back, we will continue the conversation on consistent characters. We're back and we are continuing the conversation on consistent character. Rob, I don't think I'm insulting you to say this, but you're kind of a nerd when it comes to this stuff. And you are very much into advanced tools. Let's talk about advanced tools for a minute. Tell us what you're using to get consistency in the work you're doing with those advanced tools.
Well, I would have until you slandered me like that. No, nerd is a label that I own wholeheartedly. If you are just getting into image generation, it's important to note that these things exist because as you're building your creative tool set, these are going to be the things that you can really start to apply a lot more control to the images that you're generating and really achieve that creative vision that you have for the image or video that you want to produce. The first one is called ControlNet. It's basically a suite of models that accompany your image model and let you provide images that kind of guide the structure of the image that's generated. There's like a bunch of different options here, but a few different options are a depth control net, which basically like you upload an image and it'll turn that into a depth map. And then it uses the structure to then generate the new image. And so basically like all of the things that the new image generates will be aligned with all of the things that were in that input image. And so that way, if you want a portrait that is posed in a very specific way, or if you want a building in a very specific spot in your image, you can do that and it would then guide that structure. Another one is the edge control net. It's called Canny, but it basically detects the edges of an image and kind of like produces this image that kind of looks like a sketch. And then it uses that to guide the structure. Another really cool one is the pose control net. And basically it detects the pose of anybody who's in that image and uses it to guide the structure. And so this is really cool because you can create a pose input with multiple characters. The only information getting to the model is the pose, none of the other stuff. So it'll get the precise placement of those people and how they're interacting together over the scene. So control nets are really powerful ways to guide that structure. You can find all of these in Leonardo. In our last episode, we talked about open source models. all of this stuff comes out of the open source world. And so if you're using some of the open source image generators and models that we talked about, these you'll find these in those suites as well. If you're using Leonardo, you'll look for edge to image, depth to image, or pose to image.
Man, that sounds incredible. In fact, we might need to take another break so I can go play with that too. Rob, you are, again, blowing my mind today. All really powerful tools. But there is an even more powerful tool in our toolkit. I have used this one extensively, but tell us a little bit about taking it to the next level with the way that we train these models.
Yeah, so now we're getting into Jedi mode. And quite literally, I'm going to ask you for your example here in just a moment. But Jedi mode here is training an image model. And so we use the word training colloquially when we talk about AI to mean just like prompting. But this is where you can actually train your own image model. There's two options. One, you can either train an entire model, or two, you can create what's called a LoRA. And we'll unpack what that is. But basically, the concept here is that models create images based on the data that they've been trained on. And so they're trained on millions of images. Every one of those images has a caption to describe what's in that image. And so the model starts to learn certain concepts like people or objects or styles based on learning what those things have in common as they look at all of those images, break them down, and understand them. But the problem there is that if a model has never seen something, it won't be able to produce it. And so either if it hasn't seen an image of that thing, or if that thing was just never described in the training captions, it just can't produce it. So you can actually teach a model to create things it's never seen before, like a character, a style, or a concept, by training a LoRA. And what a LoRA is, LoRA, it stands for low rank adaptation model. You don't need to know that. All you need to know is that it's a tiny model that kind of sits on top of the image model and basically adds some kind of auxiliary information to that model, essentially teaching it to learn what that concept should look like and how it should be described. So it actually like modifies that model and produces almost a new model for you. It's like an extra set of instructions that tells the model, when I ask you for a Rob Lauder, you've never seen that before, but here's what it should look like. Let me give you a few images and teach you how to recognize that thing.
LoRAs have like changed my life in AI. Even when I have a client that needs something, you can train it pretty quickly and it's not so difficult. The benefits are that you can reproduce that person, that object, that thing over and over again because you have trained. And it really only takes a handful of images. I usually like to have about 20 or so, but I've even trained LoRAs on less images than that. You can train it on a person. I have a friend that had a favorite video game controller and he took pictures of it from all different angles and was able to then recreate it using whatever model he was using and the combination of that and the LoRA. What's really cool is that when you have the LoRA, you can then prompt that image because it understands the likeness of that person in different styles. So I can say, make Jason as a comic book character or as Indiana Jones or whatever, and it will take that likeness and bring new things that are trained into the model that you already are working with. So it's more precise. And if you caption your images, you can get even more detailed and predictable results. And it's all self-contained. So once you have your LoRA, it's all there. You don't have to give it your image over and over again. You don't have to give it new references, but it just knows who you are through the trigger words that are attached to that LoRA.
Yeah, part of what makes a LoRA so powerful is that in these other techniques, we're taking external information and using it to give the model a little nudge. With a LoRA here, we're actually teaching the model to recognize and reproduce these things. And it's not going to be 100% as effective as training that model from scratch. And so that base model is still going to have some understanding of what these different concepts are, but it's going to be a lot more precise than just kind of showing it a reference and saying, hey, this is kind of what I want you to do. It's like if you were taking the human artist analogy, either you're giving them something to look at and then copy, or you're giving them like an in-depth course and lots of practice on how to produce that thing such that when you ask them for that thing, they can just produce it without any of the additional information necessary.
Yeah. And I have found with the LoRA that I created for myself, it's pretty consistent, but 20% of the images don't look like me. They look like my brother or someone close to my likeness, but not exactly me. As with everything, you have to do a lot of generations to cherry pick the really good ones out. Rob, this all sounds really complex, but it's really not that difficult for the average Joe Schmo who is playing with AI to do it. Tell us a little bit about how do you train these models?
Yeah. So, training a model sounds like it's going to be absolutely crazy, and it can be, but there's a lot of tools out there that are going to make it a lot easier and more accessible for you to do. The one that's like in vogue right now is called FAL.ai, F-A-L. We've talked about this model Flux a lot. Flux is just another image model out there like Stable Diffusion you might have heard of. Using the service called FAL.ai, they have a service for you where you can just upload some images and then train the LoRA. The first thing to do is to find a platform like FAL.ai. Civet AI has another one of these as well that you can train either Stable Diffusion models or Flux models and do it online with a little bit of input.
And I use Krea a lot. That's one of my favorite platforms. And they have a super simple, you just upload 20 images and give it your trigger word, and it will train the LoRA right there on Krea.
Some other ones have LoRA training built in as well. Leonardo does. Recraft lets you train a style. And if you are super nerd like I am, you can do them locally. There's software that you can run to train a LoRA on your own hardware. You just have to have the hardware to do it, as we talked about in our open source episode. Once you know where you're going to train, and again, I'd start with that FAL.ai site and train a Flux LoRA, super easy. We'll also have a tutorial for that for you. Check out the show notes on that. The next thing you need to do is build a data set. And when I say data set, I don't mean like, gazillion images. I'm talking about 20-ish images is the sweet spot of whatever the thing that you want to teach it is. And so if it's a character, like, really popular, people want to train their LoRAs on their likeness so that they can have themselves, living the millionaire life at the beach. For Instagram, I don't roll that way, but I do like to put myself on the moon hanging out, which is obviously fiction, and not pretend that it's reality. But you take 20-ish images of whatever the thing is that you want to train. That could be a character. That could be a style. So I used the 2001: A Space Odyssey reference earlier. Take, 20 Kubrick film clips. That could be a concept, like a pose or an expression. Anything you can teach the model. Get 20 images of that thing. Quality matters, but not as much as you would think, because the model's really good about figuring out what are the details that are important and neglecting things like blurriness and stuff like that. If you want a lot of control over your LoRA, you would write a specific caption to describe what's in each image, because the more precise you are in your captioning, the more nuanced the model is going to learn what the thing is that it's supposed to be learning. And so if I just use a bunch of images and the only thing that says is Rob Lauder, it doesn't know what a Rob Lauder is. It might infer after training for a while that the person in that image is a Rob Lauder, but it might pick up things like background. It might pick up things like clothing that we don't necessarily want. So to avoid that, you can write some specific captions like man in his mid-30s, Rob Lauder with beard and glasses, wearing a gray hoodie in a studio. Then the model learns, okay, this is a Rob Lauder, but this Rob Lauder is also wearing glasses. So it can learn that concept independently. It can learn the studio concept independently and separate those from the thing that you're trying to train.
So Rob, is there any way to use the AI to look at your images to write captions, or is that a human thing?
Yeah, so actually when you train images through these tools, a lot of them will automatically caption them for you. It'll do a good job to begin with. But if I'm doing a serious LoRA and I want it to be something that's very high quality, I've got a script that I use that basically runs all of my images through a GPT Vision API request. You could do the same thing with ChatGPT. The problem, though, is that ChatGPT is really bad at writing image captions. You would want to give it some structure there. But most of the time, the built-in ones are going to be good enough for everyday purposes, and the manual captioning is if you want to get really, really precise. As you're captioning, you're going to want to use what's called a trigger word, and that's just a consistent phrase to describe the thing that you want it to train on. So, if you're using, like I've trained myself, and I say a Rob Lauder, because that's, I guess my last name's spelled like laughter, so that could kind of confuse the model a little bit. I know, I've trained some on you with Roberto because our listeners might not know your first name is also Robert. So
It is.
we are two birds of a feather here. Generally speaking, you can use your name or something like that. If it's like a specific pose, you would just use that same phrase over and over, and that's your trigger word. And then you just run the training. And so if you're using FAL.ai, it's called Flux Fast LoRA Trainer. You just upload the images, you tell it what your trigger word is, you run the thing, it takes about 5 minutes, and then it gives you a URL to a model, which is just basically that tiny image model that you can then use to generate the images. And it's got instructions. We'll have those instructions, tutorial as well. But actually running the inference is just you generate the image and you tell it, here's the LoRA that I want to use. And it's simple as that. You don't need to worry about prompting or anything like that. End of the day, it's just like anything else in the world of AI. You might need to give it a few tries, but it's pretty accessible if you follow some of those pre-built tools.
You can combine LoRAs. You can take your likeness and then also take a LoRA that is trained on a specific style. So I want Rob Lauder as a Play-Doh character made out of clay or whatever. And you can combine those, which is pretty cool as well. That's image LoRAs, but you can also do video LoRAs. Rob, you want to talk a little bit about what tool you're using for that?
I'm using FAL.ai. There's a open source video model that we talked about in our open source episode last week called Honeywon. You could run it on the FAL service, and then you can also train LoRAs on the FAL service. The cool thing about it is it's a video model, but you can train it on images. So it can learn to recognize the thing without having to have video of those things. You could also, however, train it on video to teach it things like specific movements and animations and camera motion and things like that. There's another model just dropped a week ago called WAN, not Juan, WAN, WAN. And it's fine tunable as well. Those tools aren't on FAL yet, but you'll probably see those coming out soon because the more people can fine tune these models, the more they're going to get used and the better off everybody else is going to be.
Yes. And I got to say, some of the most fun I've had this year playing with AI was after you trained my likeness into FAL. I was able to generate me as Superman and Indiana Jones and a Jedi, as you mentioned before, and all that's pretty fun to be able to see your images come to life.
So we've generated the perfect image, but something's off. Either like you described, it doesn't look perfectly like you, it looks like your brother, or maybe it does look perfectly like you, but you've got the 6-finger problem and your hand is a mangled mess, or there's some other inconsistency in the image after it's generated. Do I have to start from scratch there? Can I salvage that image? What techniques do we have to pick up from there?
So one of the ways that you can create consistency is by doing a face swap. You can provide an image of the character the way you want that character to look, and then swap it after the fact. This works with photographs, it works with illustrations. It needs to be a decent image. It needs to be close, not far away or blurry or anything like that. But you can then apply that face to a new face that is similar. I did this last year on an image where I was doing a revival of the Goonies movie, a sequel, and I was able to prompt a bunch of adults standing together in an attic looking at a map. They didn't look exactly like the characters, but I did try and prompt to look like the actual actors, and then was able to kind of do a face swap after the fact and get their likeness in that way. So that's a way to do that.
Yeah, so let's take that example. What if you generated that image and there was like one person less than what you wanted, or there's like something random on the table that shouldn't be there? What can we do about that?
Inpainting is an option where you can select a part of the image and then reprompt that part of the image. So if you need another face or a person, or if you want to remove an object or add an object, most platforms have a way to do this. It will take that section and prompt something new. There are all sorts of different ways to do it within the various apps.
Yeah, one thing that I found is that it helps fix some of those small details. If your hand is mangled, you can select the hand and just prompt for a hand. and then it will generate another hand that's also mangled, but you can do it 4 or 5 times and possibly get it right. We talked about photo batching on the front end of the process. If you're not familiar with the term photo batching, it's just taking multiple photos, throwing them all together, and then producing a collage of sorts. But one thing that I've found to be helpful is like if I were to produce an image that had something that wasn't quite right, I could take an actual photo of that thing, like a hand, and just slap it in there, and then use that as the basis for the inpainting, and it'll smooth it out and make it more coherent by putting that into the image. One of the things that you find with AI image models a lot is that people all look the same, particularly if there's like generic crowd. It'll be like Attack of the Clones staring at you. You can use Inpainting to just like select a face and then one by one prompt for different types of people. So one thing to note is if you're going to try Inpainting, you might run into the problem where the model has a tough time making big structural changes, because the way Inpainting works is just the same way image-to-image generation works, by taking that original image, adding some noise to it, and then using that as a starting point to generate something new. So if it doesn't denoise it enough, that thing is just going to stay there because it doesn't give the model enough creativity to run with. Or if it denoises it too much, it might just be like completely out of place. You can actually refine that setting as you're doing the inpainting. Another thing to note is that it's not like instructing a designer to like make the logo pop or to remove the chair. If I say remove the chair, like image models don't follow that sort of instruction. So it's just going to say, oh, chair, you want a chair, and it's going to make a chair. Instead, you'll want to prompt for something like empty space. Give it an affirmative thing to produce in that space that you're inpainting. So it's a really cool tool, particularly when you get something that you just like, this is so close, I just want to add some stuff to it. That's the way to go. Don't go back to the drawing board.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, these tools are getting more and more intuitive and they understand better than when I first started trying to do those little variations or in-painting options. Like Photoshop Generative Fill does seem to be getting smarter as time goes on. And I suppose that's because there's constant training.
Yeah, with Photoshop specifically, you can also give it a reference image for the inpainting. So you can say like, maybe you have a empty table and you want to put a vase of flowers on the table. You paint over where you want the vase of flowers. You give it the photo of the vase of flowers, and then it inpaints that thing into the image in a cohesive way. There's another option to do the same thing with flux fill. So flux fill is a inpainting model that uses flux as a base, and you can actually apply a LoRA that you've trained on that thing so that it can inpaint a specific character or something like that without having to go through the photo batching process.
My pastor was doing a series on generations, and I took his photo and circled around his clothing to make it 1970s. When I would just prompt that, give me like a leisure suit, I couldn't get anything decent. But then I did give it a picture of a leisure suit, and it put a leisure suit on him that looked almost exactly like the reference model. So that is a very handy way of customizing your images.
Yeah, so let's put all of this together now, because we talked about a lot of different techniques, but we started out, Jason, you said that your workflow matters. And what I want you to take away from this episode is not all the little nitty-gritty things that you have to do to be an expert image generator. No, I want you to take away the fact that you have options and you have tools that you can use to accomplish certain things. And if you run into a challenge with producing images, you don't have to give up. There are so many things that you can do if you want to take it further. So if all you want is pretty images, you got a few tools in your toolbox, great. You can control that image beyond prompt alone. But if you're using generative AI tools for larger projects like illustrating a book or creating a short film or reproducing a specific character or a style, you can use all of these tools in tandem for the most control. And so just kind of like real quick recap. If you want to produce consistent characters, you want to go the character reference route, or you want to go the LoRA route. If you want to create consistent styles, that's what a style reference is for, or you can train a LoRA on your style as well. If you want to produce consistent compositions, that's where those depth, edge, and pose detections will come in handy. And then finally, if you need to fix inconsistencies in something that you've already created, that's where things like face swapping or inpainting can really help you recover those images and take an image from something that's okay and produces something that's worth putting into production. At the end of the day, That's what it comes down to. What can we do to make these images actually usable in a production workflow? And consistency is absolutely essential there. If you don't have consistency, you just can't produce coherent work apart from luck. We've come such a long way in this area. I'm excited to see where we're going to go in the coming months.
Absolutely. And the thing is, the techniques change depending on the project. So you don't always go to the same solution every single time, but it's just a good thing to have all of those different options on the table. And Rob, we say this all the time, but this is the worst it's ever going to be. It's only going to get better, and we'll be able to do more and more as these models mature. It's an exciting time to be in a creative production world.
What a time to be alive. Well, man, that's all we got time for today. I am looking forward to our next conversation because we're going to talk about how to produce a book with AI. So we're going to take a little bit of a detour. We'll catch you on the next episode, and I look forward to that conversation.
Thanks for tuning in to Fuse, the AI Creative Podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, it would mean a lot to us if you'd smash that subscribe button, leave a review, and share this episode with a friend. If you'd like to connect with us or follow along on the projects we're working on, find us on Instagram at AI Creative Podcast or AICreativePodcast.com.